for the period of September 9th, 2010 through October the 6th, 2010.
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay, number 5, discussion and/or possible direction to staff regarding draft action plans for redevelopment areas 1 and 2, and this is actually what we're here for today. So,
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Armando and Jeff.
Chairman Smith, members of the agency, Armando Ornelas, City Planner. This item is basically the presentation of draft action plans for each of the 2 redevelopment agencies, Area 1 and Area 2. The intent here today is to walk through what's proposed and get direction from the agency board in terms of what to bring forward at a meeting in November for action. So this is not agendized as an action item other than but rather for discussion and direction to staff. Okay.
Are you going to need this? Is this something different?
Yeah, that's nice. So in terms of the discussion, what we thought we'd do is for each of the redevelopment areas is go through 1, goals for the draft action plans. Secondly, available resources and funding, which Jeff Cronk, as Finance Director, will address. The proposed plans and expenditures, and then we would ask for the agency board discussion and direction to staff. Obviously, if there's discussion and any questions as we go along, please interject. In terms of the goals for this draft action plan for redevelopment area 1, the first would be to capitalize on recent site assembly progress and the Phase 2A public improvements. The site assembly progress, as you know, as we were able to acquire the right-of-way to proceed with the Phase 2 public A improvements and also to create the majority of the parcels that line the plaza. Second would be to initiate a program of complementary projects and initiatives to really re-energize the redevelopment effort and to move forward. Next, to direct resources towards implementation of Spark's branding, marketing, and special event strategies. I think this is a key aspect of this action plan for redevelopment area 1. Next, to increase the number of people and the amount of activity downtown outside of the summer months. So we're looking really at extending the special event season and the amount of activity into the fall, winter, and spring. To continue implementation of the Victorian Square Development Plan and attract private investment. There's a component of this that calls for investment in and improvements to Area 1 neighborhoods. And I think the intent would be to prioritize that in a way that also facilitates the implementation of the transit-oriented development plan that the City of Sparks has adopted. Next, to enhance the appeal, functionality, and programmability of Victorian Square as a special events venue. Certainly, in terms of the direction that the City of Sparks City Council has chosen to go in terms of the BLT and the related branding, marketing efforts, as well as the special events emphasis. The proposed improvements and enhancements to the plaza are intended to advance that. Next, to stimulate and to provide a focal point for the arts and cultural activities in Sparks, and I think that goes hand in hand with the modifications to the plaza that are proposed. We're looking to stabilize and preserve existing facilities, and in particular, we'll get to this in a minute, but the parking garage at C and 10th Street, which is deteriorating. To create construction employment through some of these projects, and finally, to improve mobility between Victorian Square, the marina, and the surrounding neighborhoods. Obviously, in order to fund a set of projects and improvements, we would need to have some resources, and so Jeff is going to go through those with you, please.
Yeah. Good morning. What we have here is just a high-level summary of, it's early in the fiscal year, so these are in accordance with what we filed with our budget. So we have for redevelopment area 1, we're discussing here the unreserved ending fund balance. We have some reserves that'll that are actually over and above that amount, but we wanted to just share kind of, you know, the available resources here. So we've got the unreserved available ending fund balance of approximately $2 million. We expect room taxes from the room tax revenue fund of, what is that, about $550,000, I think we put. And then we have some unspent bond proceeds that are left over from our C-tax issuance of about $1.84 million. And at the very bottom, we also have something we're working on. We're hoping to get a net proceeds of $1.8 million. And I kind of wanted to explain that a little bit, unless there were other questions on this first. Yes, please.
Mr. Schmidt?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Step back to the 2006, 2007 bond proceeds. Did I hear you correct saying that's a C-tax bond?
Yes,
So that's a general obligation bond?
yes. That was originally funded. These are actually funded by the redevelopment agency, though, but it was issued from the city.
I wasn't aware those are C-tax funds. So what did we issue the C-tax funds for, and why do we have the money still there then?
They're actually paid for, and let me clarify that a little bit. They're C-tax, supported by C-tax revenues. Obviously, the agency doesn't receive C-taxes, but the agency is repaying and has an agreement between the agency and the city to repay that, and it's coming out of the primary proceeds, which is property taxes. So the bond itself is, and it's actually not a general obligation. It's a revenue bond from the C-tax, but it's the obligation of the city as opposed to the agency, but the agency is funding that
It's
portion.
a revenue, but it's a general obation revenue. There's no other way that C-tax comes in but to the general fund.
No, it is a revenue supported only.
Your revenues based upon C-tax within the district?
No, the city in general.
Okay, and let me correct me if I'm wrong. Give me the method that sales tax are deposited in the general fund only of the city of Sparks.
Sure, through
Then the
the,
general fund writes the check to the agency. So it is a general obligation fund based upon C-tax revenue. It is a first and foremost, when sales tax comes in, that is a number one, any obligations to that C-tax has to
Payment.
be paid for first.
yes,
Then the rest of the C-tax goes to police, fire, and the
everything
the
else.
services.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
May I ask a clarifying question, sir? But then are you saying that the redevelopment agency pays back the city
Yes,
for that C-tax via property taxes within the district?
correct.
So as long as there are property taxes within the district, the C-tax funds get paid back?
Correct.
And just to refresh the agency board's memory, these were the bonds that the city issued in 2006 and refunded in 2007 that were used to pay for 4 projects, one of which was Golden Eagle, or a portion of the Golden Eagle project. The Phase 1 public improvements, which were primarily the extension of Avenue of the Oaks to make it a through street, as well as the utility work that was done in that area. And then the bulk of the unspent proceeds, if you will, what was intended to fund the design of City Hall in downtown when that was being contemplated. So this $1.84 million is essentially, and I'm sorry, $1.5 million of that was intended for that purpose. $337,000, which is left over, was money that was saved basically because the Phase 1 public improvements were done less expensively than had been budgeted. So that's the.
Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the lifespan left on these bonds?
I believe they expire in 2017.
So they expire when the agency expires?
No, agency is 2023.
2023?
Yes.
Thank you.
More questions? Okay,
Okay.
moving on.
Okay, and actually, if we can,
You're going back, sorry.
yeah, I wanted to talk about the room tax credit facility that we're proposing. This is actually going to be from, it's city money, it's a city revenue, and we're proposing Right now, we have, as you can see on that second line, approximately $550,000 coming in, 550 to 600,000. We're a little unsure of how that's coming in right now, but that's going to be about what we're expecting right now. We want to see if we can bond those proceeds and use them for possible projects that Armando will talk about. But in order to get that done, right now the investment market is well, it's actually quite crazy right now, and there's just not a lot of investment interest going on right now. We've been kind of out there beating the bushes. I've been working with our financial advisor, and there's just not a lot of activity. But we have been able to find one interested financial organization who would be interested in doing a private placement. However, they're currently holding some of our bonds as it is. And their feedback to us is that they don't have an investment interest to have a capacity for more Sparks debt. So what we would have to do is refinance something that they already own in order to free up some of their capacity in order so they can take on this portion of their debt. So basically freeing up what they already own.
And they're willing to do
sell
that
on the open market to somebody else.
They're willing to do that?
They are. Yep. Well, I mean, that's what we're hearing right now. We're kind of working with them on a daily basis, and that's what we're proceeding towards. And I have planned for the meeting on the 8th of November to come up. We can start this process with just a resolution for a sale, which basically doesn't obligate the city or agency in any way, but just kind of keeps the ball rolling. So we can, again, keep kind of beating those bushes to see in the investment community if this is even something we can go forward with.
So we're not going to increase our debt at all, we're just going to restructure what we have?
No, this would actually increase the debt.
But we're going to restructure the payment?
Exactly.
Okay.
What'll happen is we'll restructure. What we're trying to do is a refunding of anywhere between 1 to 3 of our issuances, again, depending on what we can get done with the bonds that they hold, you know, this one particular financial institution. And then the new debt would be just for the room tax proceeds.
Okay. Mike?
Why do we want to do this?
Which one?
I mean, you know,
the actual,
yeah,
the new
bonding
debt?
out. Why do we need $1.8 million?
I think Armando's going to get into that as far as what.
So in other words, if we want something to do on Victorian Square, this is how you're saying we want to pay for it. So we're going to have more bonds.
Exactly. In addition to what our current, and what I've listed here, this is what our current resources are.
Yeah, but you're
The
saying
1
right
point-
now we have 2,250,000, like 260,000, 2,600,000 in cash, basically. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still want to have a bond out for 1.8 million.
If we want to fund these other projects. If we don't, then we won't.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
there better be a big reason why we need to go into debt for something
Mm-hmm.
when we have the cash.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chair. I'm going to go on the flip side of this one here and defend this particular bond, because the $559,000 is a dedicated fund. There's only one thing we can spend it for, and that's downtown Sparks. It's got to be within the redevelopment agency #1 area, correct?
that's correct.
So, you know, the merits passing, whether we do a new bond or not, this money can only be spent in one area, and that's it. So, you know, it doesn't affect the general fund, doesn't affect anything else.
That's correct. This is not a general obligation whatsoever.
Correct, and that's why I wanted to make sure that there's two distinct issues with both of these bonds.
Yes. Mhm. So at the end, this is, and kind of going back to your point, Mr. Kerrigan, is two different line items. You know, the amount of proceeds that we have, or resources, I guess I should say, the amount of resources that we have which is the first line at $4.4 million. I'm sorry, without the additional bond proceeds would be $4.4 million. And then if we end up doing the new issuance would pump that up to $6.2 million. And then it becomes a prioritization issue, which again, Armando's going to go through in further detail as far as the different projects that are out there. And then you kind of choose you know, how much you want to fund. We'll determine, you know, if we go after this or not.
Just a quick question, if I can, Mr. Chair, on this one. The determination of the $1.8 million bond was based upon a present-day need not on a present-day value
No,
of
it's
the
actu-
bond, of the income?
It's actually on a present-day value of the income, based on whether we need about 2 or 3 times coverage. Again, this is something we're going to work out with the financial institution. We're looking at right now about a 3.4% interest rate, and about the most we can get is a net proceeds of about 1.8,
That's
maybe $2 million.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
So if I may, just elaborate here a bit. Going back to this table, as you see, the 2006/7 bond proceeds and the amount that would be netted from a potential room tax credit facility are, approximately equal. And so, if you look at that $4.4 million, you can, if the agency board made the decision to expend that much money towards these projects, you can get there one of 2 ways, either through expending the existing bond proceeds on hand or by tapping this room tax credit facility, if in fact, at the end of the day, we can get it done. I mean, I think, and so we were looking at options in that regard. The other thing that I would make note of in terms of the room tax credit facility is that essentially by borrowing against it, then we have tied it up. So, that was the thought here in part as well.
And we've tied it up. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, we have, if we borrow against it, we have pledged that revenue stream to the lender. And so to the extent that, it may be looked at for redirection by, the state or something along those lines, then you wouldn't, it would be in a sense protected. So.
Okay.
A couple of important points to note about all of these available resources and funding is that they are all restricted for redevelopment, tourism enhancement, and/or capital projects uses. So these are not revenues that can be used for it's like you would the general fund for the general operations of the city. They're all for one of these purposes in one way or another, and in some cases, in multiple ways. The other thing is, as we, once we have direction from the agency board in terms of the slate of projects and expenditures to bring forward, as we work on developing those projects and bringing them towards implementation, our cost estimates for each of them will be refined, and to the extent that we have something less than $4.4 million, then we would obviously have to manage to a budget or plan around a budget. So that's the caveat I would say with regard to that. So the third part of this for redevelopment area 1 is the discussion of the projects and the initiatives themselves. Staff has been working with us over the last several weeks with the agency chair and the vice chair in terms of developing recommendations to the full agency board. And so we'll present those recommendations. We also have some alternate projects and expenditures that we have looked at and discussed, and so those are being presented to you as well for discussion. In terms of the projects, we're dividing them into 3 categories. One is capital projects, the other is non-capital expenditures, and then there's a third category of development incentives. First project is repairs to the city's parking garage at C and 10th Street, or I think strictly speaking it's the agency's parking garage at C and 10th Street. That facility is really showing some wear and tear. In particular, there's a lot of problems associated with the fact that it doesn't drain well. We're looking at 2 phases of the repairs to this garage. The first phase is the number over in the right-hand column, which is a $510,000 estimate. And the total for the 2 phases is $1.2 million. The other $690,000 is one of the alternate projects, so we will show that to you when we get there. But basically, the repairs of the garage would be for the purposes of improving drainage, repairing masonry, sealing the parking decks, repairing the stairs and elevator, and replacing the incandescent lights with LED lights. And so that's the first of these projects on the recommended capital projects list. If you have any questions, Chris Cobb is here, and he can certainly address the needed repairs in more detail than I can.
Any questions on that first item? Okay. But this is a recommended, this is for
Yes,
capital projects.
these are all the recommended capital projects.
Okay.
The second of these is what we're referring to as a neighborhood capital improvements program. The intent here is to utilize the agency's resources, not just in Victorian Square, but also to benefit the surrounding neighborhoods. The focus here would be on the residential areas north of Victorian Square and then to the east, so still within the redevelopment area, but focusing on areas that are primarily residential. I mean, I think there's obviously commercial at the edges. The projects could include things like repairing sidewalks, curb and gutter, and possibly the narrowing of select streets. The idea here would be to improve the neighborhood and also to facilitate transit-oriented development. So to some extent, the focus on these would be things that improve the pedestrian environment in particular, and that you know, over time allow transit-oriented development to be more feasible. We don't have a specific set of prioritized improvements to share with you today. If this neighborhood CIP is something that the agency board would like to see go forward, we will work on developing that. I know that the community development staff went out with RTC and some of their consultants who are working on transit-oriented type improvements, pedestrian and bike improvements, and they did an audit, and I think that process might lend itself well to identifying specific projects. But at any rate, the point is we would bring these back for City Council and agency board approval. In terms of what's budgeted here, we're proposing $700,000 in this current fiscal year. The reality is, you could spend much more than this in this area, and so again, the priorities would be important. And again, Chris Cobb is here if you have questions about the nature of what staff has been discussing today.
Any questions for Chris? Okay, moving on.
The third project is in a sense a set of enhancements to the plaza area to basically increase the programmability of that area of the downtown. The objectives would be multiple, but they would include having a facility that we could use to extend the special event season into the shoulder seasons in particular, and even into the winter. If you also in particular added a temporary ice sheet, which is something that comes up under a different category, but in many respects is really the same project. It would also be a facility that would broaden the range of special events that are possible, because you would have more protected space. Park staff has been involved in these discussions to date, parks and special event staff, and so they're here if you have particular questions of them. It would be a point that, or a facility that could be a focal point for the arts and cultural activities in Sparks. And it's also something that we see as potentially being able to reduce the cost of special events production. So because this is sort of the big ticket item in this slate of projects at $2.8 million, we are working with RTKL, who did the Victorian Square Master Plan, and Nate Cherry from RTKL is here. And so we did ask him to provide you the thinking to date in terms of this proposed project. So, Nate, please.
Before we get started with you set up, I'd just like to say this piece of property is 120 feet long, wide by 240 feet wide. It's not something that we have planned for any other construction. We've always looked at the spine as the sides of that or in front of the theater. And I'm very excited about this because getting people down to Victorian Square is what the branding effort is all about. It's all about the special events, and to get people down there during the winter, all year long, whether we have it when we don't have an ice skating rink, whether we have ice carving contests, or whatever we have, we'll have this facility down there, which will lead to other businesses saying, hey, look, Sparks is providing traffic for us year-round. Maybe now's the time to make a move and go down there and put a business in. So, I mean, it all ties in, and this is an opportunity for us that we weren't planning on doing right now. But because of the possibility of sweeping our money and then we'd be out of business, I think it's a great opportunity.
And to your point, Chairman Smith, it's certainly something that was, has always been potentially contemplated. Some sort of band shell or pavilion has always been contemplated as part of the adopted master plan for Victorian Square.
Mayor and council members, it's a pleasure to be here again. Nice to see you again. I first want to compliment you on having the vision really to take advantage of funding that can really augment a public space and turn it into a really fantastic public amenity that's going to transform the function of the downtown as a whole. I want to talk quickly about some of the event spaces that we've worked on. What are the elements that we really want to fix out there in our site reconnaissance? How important flexibility is really to the functioning of the space? What type of amenities you might consider integrating into the plaza as it transforms? What are the options that we're really considering? And then finally, next steps as we move forward, really in the beginning of our design work. But the first element I want to talk about in our experience, what are some of the elements about effective event spaces that we've worked on in other projects? This is an example of Legacy Town Center outside of Dallas, which is really the center of the whole district. It's a community activity space, Christmas tree lightings. It's where people come together throughout the year, and it's really where they come together. And it's designed specifically to accommodate civic functions throughout the year. Extending the season, creating some sort of pavilion that can provide shelter and some heat in the shoulder seasons is really going to create more reasons for people to come downtown. This example is Reston Town Center, which we started work on in 1990 as one very effective public space, both in the wintertime and in the summertime. Flexibility in terms of expansion, making a space that can be expanded easily is it takes quite a bit of thinking. This is an example, Addison Town Center outside Dallas, which can really accommodate major events and also smaller events, weekly events, and then also major events throughout the year, and how that can be thought about. We're going to talk a little bit about. Covered and open air component allows you flexibility when the weather is inclement. Creating both active and passive spaces which share the same area is very important, because you want active space for kids and then passive space for families to come together and interact. And so how that space can share those activities is also important. Special amenities, Armando talked about an ice sheet is one amenity. Other amenities like farmers markets, pumpkin patch sales, those kinds of things that you can't find anywhere else are going to be important to the functioning of the downtown. Art and culture is very important. Shakespeare in the Park, those sorts of things. Light and sound, the example there is LA Live, where special lighting effects are really going to add to the drama and the glamour of the space. And then also branding and theming. I noticed you have a new city logo, and creating themed events that really fit into your brand are going to be important to the functioning of the space. When we go out there and Armando and I walk around, we talk about elements that we need to fix. The things that I notice are a number of elements. First of all, the front space is really not wide enough to accommodate certain types of events. It's only about 42 feet wide, which means you're going to have difficulty integrating certain types of flexible event spaces like farmers market, 10 by 10 tents, a rink, which needs to be about 60 by 120 typically. It just doesn't have enough flexibility to accommodate those types of uses. You have a couple obstructions which really block the view back, and so what happens is you don't have that flexibility to create a grand space for major events, because the electrical closet and also the element in front, which never really was brought to its full fruition, maybe a flagpole, something like that, really has never been resolved. So it's an obstruction, and it really affects the flexibility of the space. The clock, which in downtowns is typically used as a meeting space, is really, in my view, in the wrong location. I'll meet you at the clock. It's really buried in the space. And so refurbishing and relocating the clock is really important to sort of the story of the space. Inadequate lighting, really, as you drive by at night, if we do have an ice sheet, you want that that rink or those event space lit up so that they really glow at night. They create this real sense of glamour and drama. The lighting currently is inadequate for those types of space, those types of uses. The corners are really very open, and what happens is as the wind blows, it really creates this very wind-blown open plaza. And so a sense of enclosure would really help at those corners as well. And then also reconfiguring the space to make it more flexible. What I mean by that is so that the plaza can really more easily accommodate small weekly events like a farmer's market, medium scale events like movies in the park where you have a grander space where you can have a stage in back and seating in front so that the whole space is used for events. And then the major events, the rib cook-offs and whatnot, reconfiguring perhaps those spaces so that you have a stage space within the main plaza. All those are opportunities that we really need to talk to and think about. In many projects, we program many events, and so the sort of laundry list of events that you imagine would be something that we want to consider. Some of the elements that help the story of the space, obviously the clock as a meeting place is an important feature. Kiosks are important, retail kiosks, because they activate the space when there's nothing going on. So perhaps finding some retailers that sort of anchor the space. The temporary ice sheet is a wonderful use that, for example, in Reston is open from November through March. So it's really a 5-month event space, which we don't have currently in Victorian Square. Would be a great use. Use of lighting. This is Belmar Town Center, which is in Lakewood, Colorado, a really cold climate. Is just simply with lighting, it creates a dramatic space. A fire pit's also another very interesting element that you can integrate, which creates that sense of amenity when it's cold. Types of structures that we're considering. A tensile structure is one space that can be uplit. This example on the bottom shows really how it can become almost a lantern, and also it provides shelter from the wind and sun as well. Canopy structures are a tremendous architectural element. You can also mitigate the effects of sound by using types of baffles and that sort of thing, and it creates sort of an impressive shape inside the space as well. And then you can use temporary structures as well. Permanent light and sound as opposed to temporary AV equipment is another element that we need to talk about. So what are the plan options that we're thinking about for the space? One is to provide a tensile canopy structure in the back with a multifunction event space. We'd have to clear out some of the trees and relocate them around the tensile canopy, which is very much possible in this iteration. We would have to relocate about 20 trees, but they would all be saved. Creating an arch canopy is a little bit more flexible space in the sense that it creates a column-free space. That's another option that you can enclose. Twin canopies, that allows you to cover the entirety of the space, and so really the entirety of the plaza becomes a multifunction space. Creating a front canopy with reconfiguring the back is another option. And then finally, no canopy, which is similar to the Belmar example that I showed that we did, where you're just providing light and sound towers in the front and perhaps some retail kiosks in front which help enclose that space. I think all of these options are at play, and I think really our next step is, this is a SketchUp model of the space as it currently is to really come back to staff and a number of you all to really show you the options and really kick around what are the best ways of resolving these issues and making the most out of the opportunity that this site presents. And so in the next couple of weeks, we're going to come back with those options for you.
You know, one of the bullet points is to reduce the cost of special events production, and having a facility like this would enable us not to block off the streets when we didn't have to, and then the expense of blocking them off and then undoing it the next day. So, Julia?
I think the piece about this that's exciting to me is that we talk about arts and culture a lot in the different planning documents for the city. We talk about it in our master plan. There's a lot of talk about arts and culture in our brand leadership but we don't really have a space that's conducive to hosting, say, events for Art Town or concerts in the park or anything along those lines. And so for me, being able to jumpstart and really focus some of our special events energy into arts and culture, as well, and creating the space to do that, as well as then extending the season with the wintertime events. I think that we could really leverage what the branding committee, the brand leadership team has been doing. And I think we've gained in recent history a greater understanding in Northern Nevada in general of the importance of special events to our economy.
Yep.
And so to continue to show that Sparks is going to be a leader in special events and that we're going to have the venues and invest the resources into making sure that we continue to hold that place is important. So for me, accelerating our arts and culture program, which is essentially non-existent now. I mean, we have a little bit of an arts and culture program, but not much. And extending that winter season would be two big benefits of this particular piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I think you've been able to create a tremendous brand for yourselves as the home of special events with a space which isn't necessarily the most flexible or usable for those events. So the opportunity in terms of reinforcing that brand, expanding it, and then also the more reasons you get folks to come downtown, the more valuable the parcels in and around that area become. So it's in your long-term interest as well.
You know, and I think with this facility, you could take a page out of the Lawler Event Center where you have, we'd have to have a concession booth or something down there in skating where we can have groups come in, operate those so we don't have minimum amount of staff to, from Parks and Rec, and then they can keep the proceeds. So we're giving back to the community in the same way.
Yeah.
Any questions? Comments? Mr. Adams?
You know, I've seen the city council work quite hard on many different issues, and one of the biggest things that the city council looks at is infrastructure. In other words, you would never allow a developer to come in and present you with a plan for a very good-looking neighborhood without the water, sewer, and all the infrastructure needed. My question here is that I see that this is a one of the goals here is to extend the special event season, fall, and a beautiful venue. My question is one of, and I'm certainly not a policymaker, but I do have to work at caring for these things. In other words, the infrastructure that you will need from our office, because once special events start, we see a pretty dramatic increase in such things as criminal prosecutions related to alcohol, dogs, fights, juveniles. We see an impact on staff attorneys in that regard. We see an impact in the civil attorneys as far as increasing number of First Amendment issues. Mm-hmm. And I think any plan over here will have to have First Amendment areas. I think the Las Vegas experience down in Clark County and Las Vegas demonstrates how expensive these types of projects can be from these First Amendment advocate groups. Mm-hmm. And so when I mention infrastructure, I'm talking about the impact on staff that these types of projects will have that I don't see any planning for on this end, but we will be asked to support and address from another end. Mm-hmm. And is there any thought being given to those of us in the city that help support these special events that are so important to the city?
Well, you know, my only comment is if we had to guess on how many extra cases you were going to have for whatever reason, we'd never do any development. I mean, we just.
I understand that, but it's not. On the one hand, it's bringing up the quality of life.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're impacting it from a negative aspect, and all I'm asking for is that not that you stop development, mm-hmm. or not that you include criminal prosecutions in the formula for every time you have a development, but something of this magnitude, and you're looking at $2.8 million to expand these wonderful events. And I'm not here to criticize anything. I'm just saying that these events do have an impact on our office, and I can't speak for police or fire, parks, but yeah, I see the good-looking houses coming in, but I don't see the infrastructure to support those houses.
Julian?
First of all, I'd like to point out that this is an event space currently. And so this is the same amount of public space that it would be used for events as we have today. It's just bringing some amenities to the square to improve that event projection. With the exception of your office, which I don't believe we deal with in terms of a special events cost recovery plan, we're not changing in any way, shape, or form the way we approach events in the city by changing the space. If it's an outside producer and they are going to produce an event in that space, there'll be an estimate and a proposal and a contract that incorporates the cost of Parks and Recreation, police, and fire services, and the city will be reimbursed for those services. There's no change to that policy. If it's an event that the city of Sparks produces, and frankly, we don't see the city of Sparks producing significantly more events. We see outside producers coming in and going through the permitting process and absorbing the costs. But even when we produce events ourselves, those costs are built into our system, and they have to be built into the budget as well. So the cost recovery for direct services, and I wouldn't call your department direct services, but parks, police, and fire for all events production will be the exact same as it is today. In terms of, First Amendment rights and free speech zones and all those things, we need to continue to manage those as we do with all of our events planning, but with and it would be done exactly the way it is today. If there's more volume, I expect there would probably be more challenges, but that's part of the deal. That's the cards we're dealt as being a local jurisdiction, and we certainly aren't going to hold back increasing the quality of life for our citizens, because there are some people out there who would like to see the city, because those people who are out there who would like to see the city will always be there. So yes, I think we can do some more proactive planning. It's, in terms of the purpose of today, these are ideas that we're bringing forward to make sure that the agency board as a whole understands them. The chairman and I are recommending them wholeheartedly, but we're looking for guidance from our peers to see how they feel. And then there'll be a great more work done on all of these, because they're concepts at this point. There's not a lot of in-depth planning behind them.
And I can appreciate that, and all I'm trying to do is interject yet another issue here that I think it's appropriate for consideration, if you want to consider it. If you don't want to consider it, that's fine, but these events do have an impact on several different departments, and I wanted to bring that to light.
Yeah.
Speaking for myself and Councilman Smith, I will tell you that in the conversations that we've had with staff so far, that the impact on staff is something that we've been talking about quite a bit. It's also one of the reasons that I support this canopy, because, or whatever the end up being, because our Parks and Recreation staff is telling us that it would make it easier for them to put on certain events, because it would dramatically reduce the setup time, the 10 by 10 tents that have to be set up throughout all the barricades, all that has to be put up. So for me, increasing the efficiency of our staff time in this era has been first and foremost. I just want to assure you, in all of my questions as we've gone throughout the process to date.
Ms. Gergen?
Thank you. This is just for the rest of the agency. If we go forward with this pavilion, are we willing to restrict again the design of Victorian Square? Because you're not going to move this. We put in 2 roads that are $1 million, and then we're going to put this in that's $2.8 million. So that's $3.8 million. And if a developer comes in, what if they don't like this? So you're willing, what I'm asking is, everybody's willing to say, we're going to do this, and developer, you're going to have to build around it?
Well, from my perspective, they're going to build around that square anyway, where there's trees in there. What we're doing is we're going to provide traffic in the form of people all year round on there. So if I was a business thinking, okay, I've got June, July, and August and September covered, how about the rest of the year? We're trying to do that right now. So they may say, you know what, now's the time to put a business down here. This will bring people to that square. Yeah. We're in November.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, Ron. My question is, we have to make the decision on, we're going to restrict, once again, the design of Victorian Square. Isn't that right?
Well, and I think
I don't think so.
May I, since these are things that Ron and I are promoting, let me take it.
Hang on, Mr. Schmidt wanted to say something. Did you want to answer Mike's question, or should we'll come back to you?
Come back to me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So,
and finish the discussion.
just as a direct answer, I think you're absolutely right. I think we agreed on a master plan the pavilion is envisioned in the master plan for the vision that we're taking Victorian Square down. There certainly have been some elements within that master plan that this particular economy makes it more challenging to bring to fruition, but we are staying within the framework of the master plan, which envisions this area as a plaza.
That's the
So
only
yes.
question I'm asking is if everybody's willing to do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Because
that
I'm
is-
not willing to do that, so I just want to get it on the record,
Okay.
but that's okay.
Okay. Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one item on the proposed capital improvements that I thought that we should probably take and explore a little bit more and get a little more detail is the cost of special event productions. One of the things that the Tourism Marketing Committee has asked the BALT to do is to do the financial analysis of what exactly special events produce for the community. And in the framework that, let's say we're spending $500,000 today on special events, we know what our economic condition looks like. If we put another $1 million in, should I expect another $2 million in my general fund based upon that $1 million in investment? Now, that's a very difficult question, and they've joined up with RSCVA and stuff to really engage in this conversation, because I think all of us say that special events is good for our community, is good for the, the reputation of the community and stuff, but what is in terms of real dollars? Everybody uses this formula where there's a 3-to-1 match. You put in $1 million, somebody generates $2 million worth of economic development. There's $6 million worth of economic stimulus on out there. But if that doesn't reflect in my general fund, that means I got a zero return on my dollars, and that's not a good place to be at. So I think the economic things still needs to be worked on out. With that said, I'll go back to this reduce the cost of special events. I think with Mr. Adams' comment that maybe we need to look at that and start defining the events that get reduced cost and services. I think this is important to the Tourism Marketing Committee to know this, that, okay, Farmers Market's going to see a reduction of $4,000 an event with something like this. Then we should probably take a look at direct and indirect cost. I maybe disagree with Councilwoman Ratty that, City Attorney's Office may be a direct cost, not an indirect cost. If it is an indirect cost, we need to identify that and what these events do, what are the direct and what are the indirect costs to our different departments. And then allow those departments to come up and say, Parks and Recs has got a $50,000 reduction in their expenses this year based upon a $2.8 million investment. Mr. Adams can come back and say, okay, now your $2.8 million investment cost me $20,000 more this year. Let's identify that. And so when we start looking at the general fund, we can say, we'll make those decisions. Do our indirect cost, do our direct savings in both direct and indirect cost outweigh our costs that we're incurring on the rest of the community? And I think that's good information to be had, and that will help in the decision. I know we're not there today, and that's a little bit longer to go to, but I think in the overall scheme of things, looking at it, those are what we should be looking at is the true economic benefit of what we're doing. And I know we're not going to be able to answer that, but at least on a surface level of direct and indirect costs, we should be able to get that down, what that means. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
To me, this is all part of the plan that we finally decided on, is it not? There was going to be a plaza there. We hadn't decided exactly maybe what it was going to be, but I think it's always been in the plan. So I don't have a problem with that part. And, I think we have to keep in mind that we've got to have something we got to do with this money, or we're not going to have this money in the future. So, and that's not a great way to spend your funds, but it's better than letting somebody else take them away and not having anything. So I kind of like the idea. Like I said, the plaza was always envisioned there. I don't know that we knew exactly what it was going to look like, but this is, to me, it's pretty good stuff.
Julia?
I just want to quickly clarify my comment about the indirect and direct costs. I'm looking at them in terms of what we currently bill special events producers for. So I agree that it's a direct cost. It's just not one that we currently are trying to reimburse.
Okay. Any more discussion?
Just one comment. I think the process that Nate rolled out in terms of developing these options and looking at them carefully, will produce both cost estimates for the different options, But also, I think one of the things that Nate has been charged with really thinking about as they develop this idea is flexibility. So, undoubtedly, Mike, I think there will be some, once you have a structure there of some sort, there will be some constraints that are associated with it, but I think
the only reason I brought that up is because have we had developers beating down our door to do our master plan? And the answer is no, okay? And I mean, we had all good intentions, and I voted for the master plan because I thought it was a good master plan, okay? But things were different then than they are now. And so the point I'm trying to make, and are we done with one, or, because I have some.
No, we're not done with one.
Okay,
No.
because, let me throw this out, just in the beginning. I have a hard time incurring more debt in this economy right now. So when I look at this, it's 3.8, I think it's like 3.84 million we have in cash, is that correct?
About including the bond proceeds,
Yes.
it's about $4 million. 4.4, I'm sorry, $4.4 million.
4.4?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to, if we're gonna go forward with the pavilion, then I would ask that we don't go into debt. In other words, take away $2.8 million of something else you all wanted and just strictly go cash only. I just really have a hard time, because it looks like everybody but me is really up on the pavilion. So all I'm asking is, I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to have to restrict us on Victorian Square. Second of all, I don't want to have to go in more debt. And so everybody think about that, because after we're all done, I think if we do everything but the pavilion, we could still hit the 4.4 million. In fact, I only came up with 3.8 million, not incur any more debt, and do something that we're supposed to be doing in redevelopment, and that is using the property tax from the driver to fix up the older parts of Sparks. And I think if we do it the way that, that they've laid out, you can do $2 million worth of improvements to the neighborhood. So anyway, everybody think about that.
Well, and I said earlier about an opportunity, the marina was always going to be a marina, just not when we expected it to be. And this is an opportunity for us, we to save our funds and to have a redevelopment agency. I think this is a perfect solution. So, Mr. Schmidt?
I don't want to beat this thing, and I kind of agree with Mr. Kerrigan as far as the financial, the plan, the master plan. I think we approved the master plan, but de facto, we've been approving this square thing because we did phase 1 improvements over there and we did phase 2 improvements. And, I was against phase 1 spending the money because we didn't have a developer for the final plan, but we're pretty much, I don't know what other choices we have now. We've done phase 1 and phase 2 and street improvements. I don't know how you change now. I mean, we've got $4 million wrapped up in those street improvements on out there. I don't know if there's any other changes that we can do to it. I mean, maybe that's something we can look at it, without spending a whole lot of money, what are the different things we can do on out there if we don't do the proposed
Could I
project?
make a couple comments? Just to clarify, adding the streets into on either side of the square and making the square function more flexibly, in my view, is not restricting the plaza. It's actually making it just function the way it was always intended to. There were some design flaws to it that needed to be fixed, and that's really what this is about from my perspective. The second thing is bringing people, and especially community events, to that place. It does a couple things for you. One, it creates a nexus for the community between all the other development that you've done and the improvements there as the public space. So it creates that nexus, which is, every city is trying to create a nexus between private development and public funding. So that's important. The other thing that's very important to say is that there's been quite a bit of research that shows that bringing community events to a space actually makes it safer, not less safe. People in a space more times through the year is generally makes the space more safe. It doesn't make it less so. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So the real opportunity is really community events and bringing your community to the public space as it was always intended, as really the downtown hub.
Mr. Mayor?
To me, it all boils down to the master plan that we put together and voted on and liked. I still like it. This is part of it. And I agree wholeheartedly with you. When we get people down there, it's much more safer if there's people wandering around and doing stuff and using the businesses that are there. So that's what it's all about for me. The plan that we put together, I still like. So to me, we're executing the plan, so I'm still in favor of it.
Okay, any more questions from the agency? Comments? Before moving on, I do have some public comment, and with your indulgence, I'd like to do it now, even though we're not scheduled for that. Michonne and Stephen Esquaga?
Kind of taking us out of order, I thought this would be more of a, when I heard workshop, I thought it would be more of a sitting around a table discussing various ideas.
You know, it was supposed to be, except they're doing work in our downstairs office, so that's why we moved to the chambers.
So thanks for accommodating us. And you know, if I can be kind of loose here, and I know Stephen will fill in for what I don't cover, you know, it really concerns us too, to deplete these funds. And we've had a couple of meetings with Armando and staff regarding that, and especially the room tax fund. At first, we were of the opinion that you just take the money that's in the account, but after he mentioned that the belief is that the legislature will take the stream, you know, the future stream, I have to say begrudgingly, we probably support spending or tying up that stream as opposed to the option of losing it altogether. We worked very hard 4 or 5 years ago, as you remember, to get that, self-imposing a room tax on ourselves to get that additional funding. So we don't take that very lightly, I should say. You know, I also want to say that we also agree with the city in terms of looking at ways to improve our ability to host special events. And, you know, I guess I'm becoming one of the old dogs, because I remember when the wall came down in Sparks and the plaza went in, and the first event we did was the chili cook-off. And I can tell you numerous other events we did over the years that have come and gone. And again, our whole purpose at the Nugget was to use those special events as the means to getting people out to Sparks. And when Trammell Crow and all of the other development schemes came forward, we thought, hooray, here's another you know, ability to fill the square without doing special events, which just kill us. But that went away, and so we're kind of back to the same place of how do we cultivate more special events. And I think that we have a lot of experience doing them at the Nugget. We host a lot of the bigger events, and frankly, again, we're looking at what other events we can potentially go after, and we have some very, you know, a lot of ideas around that. So I think we are starting from a common ground, which is how do we make the square more functional for special events? And I think there is a fair amount that we agree on. As it relates to the plaza, I think we would be the first to tell you the brick house has got to be moved to the side. That's right in the middle, and it definitely inhibits the use of that space. I think you could look at realigning the trees and probably get more functionality out of the middle of the plaza. And then, of course, there's all the supplies that go with it that we have to rent every time we do an event, like staging, bleachers, seating, you know, looking at some purchase of those sorts of items that we're commonly having to spend money to rent, I think would make a lot of sense. We have a lot of concern over putting in a fixed structure. A lot. And I'll tell you why. It's not, I don't want to say that we're absolutely opposed to it, because we're going to be open to the concept that's brought forth, but a fixed structure, some of the pictures that we've seen are very fixed. We're very concerned with, because if you put in a structure, you got to look at the expense of programming it. The amphitheater is a perfect example. We spent over the city spent over $1 million putting that in, and it sits empty. Even during our major events, we have a hard time programming that. Ice sheet, same thing. I'm not saying it's not a good idea, but you need to understand the operating expense of putting that in, because there is an ongoing expense associated with that. And I guess as it relates to that structure, I would just hope that we could take the time to understand fully what the expense is to having that, because it's not just building the structure, it's the whole cost of putting the programming in there. You know, I also think that we have to be careful that we don't create an impediment to the events that we have. We do the rib cook-off, we manage the Sparks portion of Hot August Nights. We've got 2 motorcycle events. I mean, I just want to be in the Star Spangled Sparks. I think we need to be sure that it's not going to be something that we're going to have to work around. Part of what works so well for us with putting those streets in and taking the buildings down is it's ultimate flexibility when you go out there. And I think that's what we want to maintain is ultimate flexibility. It's not that you can't make that plaza work better, and I think, again, we do view putting some funds toward that as being important, but I don't know that the structure is what's going to accomplish that. If I could just say one other thing as well, and that is that I think not only do we have to look at the plaza for special events, but we have to look at Victorian Square, the street, Victorian Avenue. We still have a good chunk of our events that run along Victorian Avenue and will continue to. And I think we view that there are opportunities along Victorian Avenue for improvement as well, not just the plaza. So, you know, I agree with Nate when he says you want to create this dramatic kind of point-to-point between the movie theater and the Nugget, but I'm hoping we can do it in a way that leaves us funds to do some other things along Victorian Avenue that are really going to help us when we go to do some of these events. And, you know, when you look at reducing costs for special events, like with the farmers market, we've been in a couple of meetings with the city about putting that along the plaza, which we think is a good idea. I don't think you need the structure to reduce that expense. I think putting it in the plaza is going to reduce the expense with or without a structure. So I know I'm rambling on here a little bit, and I guess part of it is that we came kind of late into the game on this discussion, and we want to be part of this conversation because, frankly, we plan to be one of the major event producers down. We already are. We plan to do more. So I don't know, Stephen, if you have anything you want to add.
No, actually, as a big sister, she covered most of it once again. But no, I just to echo Michonne's comments, and again, I don't think it's so much if we're in opposition or in support of it. It's really appreciating being involved in the whole discussion, because I do think, I'll tell you, the changes that have been made, and it's taken a large commitment from the City Council, they've been positive from an event standpoint and really clearing the palette of what we're working with out there. But as Michonne mentioned, we do have a list also that looks at the overall as an event producer of what really could help, I think, other promoters come in. We bridged the relationship with Street Vibrations over the last few years. We've taken a more invested role of Hot August Nights on Victorian Square. And honestly, we see a lot of the things that are needed out there. And I'm hesitant to say if a structure is one of them. I agree with Councilman Kerrigan on just the flexibility of, you know, looking down a few years of what a hard structure is going to be on that plaza. And yet, I also have a lot of confidence in RTKL and Nate Cherry that may be something that we're not envisioning right. I even like the idea of the Colorado idea where there was no set structure, but it was more of a lighting and sound package, creating kind of this ambient center. But again, I look at it as a real positive of what's been built out there. This was probably the best summer once we had the construction done of how we can lay out events and all the flexibility space of having the north-south corridors running along into Avenue of the Oaks off of Victorian Avenue. But again, I think more than anything, just being involved in this process to move forward so we can somewhat have some input. In some ways, we should be thrilled that you're thinking of putting a structure and a skating rink and all these things on Victorian Square. And yet, I think we just want to be part of the discussion, because I do think, to Michonne's point, we've seen the ice rinks and some of these things. We just have to be aware of what we're getting into financially. And again, we appreciate being part of the discussion.
Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify, because this is the first I've heard of it, and both of you have mentioned it, that this list of Victorian Street improvements. Does this list been turned over to the city at all?
We have verbally had a meeting with Armando and Neil last week, and we shared some of those with them, of some of our ideas.
Because, you know, I got to stand up and defend chair and vice chair of the redevelopment agency here that, you know, here we are. I know that this particular thing I've looked at probably a half a dozen times in the last 3 to 4 months, given my input on it. And, you know, to be here today and say that, you know, last week we had a list, we presented it. I don't know, no one's talked to me about this list about Virginia or Victorian Avenue and stuff like that. And so I'm a little concerned that we're sitting here right now.
We weren't privy to your meetings that have occurred. We weren't, you know, we didn't know that you were meeting to discuss these things. Had we known, we would have asked to participate. So, you know, frankly, I had just randomly heard from Julia that the staff was working on an idea for a pavilion, and that's what prompted us to kind of say, okay, well, how do we look at the square in terms of hosting events? And, you know, the rest came down. It isn't because we were sitting here with something and just waiting to give it to you late in the game. Had we known, we would have participated.
I think what happened was they were given an update, Mr. Schmidt, of what we've been working on, and then that's when their list, they'd rather spend money on different spots, or you had ideas for for different ways to spend that money.
You were aware of it.
Pardon me?
You were aware of it.
Yeah. So, and another thing today, what we're doing today, we're not approving anything. We're going to make a motion, hopefully, to move forward, to proceed with what we're doing, and then the structure or whatever it turns out to be, RTKL will have many options for us to choose from. Julia.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the process. I think we're following an appropriate process where the chair and I have been working with staff and trying to determine what are a slate of ideas, and then we bring it to a public open forum with no intent to take a final action today. And I believe that's why you're here, is because you got notice of that forum and the possibility to bring your input forward. And so I would ask that staff take that list and make it a more formal list so that in moving the discussion forward that we have some more concrete ideas. But I mean, this is the opportunity in the public in front of everybody to sort of have Ron and I share what we've been working on with the staff, have other stakeholders come forward and say these are some things that we know, and that's part of the process.
You know, given our position on the square and what we do in the way of events, so I hope that we're not too late to have some of these ideas considered. Because again, you know, I think when push comes to shove, we're going to be the ones out there trying to make it happen. And we should be. I mean, it just is, we're in business to do that. So I hope that I hope this process isn't so far along that we don't, that our thoughts aren't taken into consideration.
In my opinion, this is the beginning of the process.
Yeah, and I would say we're starting the process now, and we'll see where it takes us.
Great.
Okay, thank
Sounds
you.
good.
I don't know how we should do this. We've got proposed capital projects of 4.1 million. Should we take a motion, then move on to the
I think we're in the middle of the list.
non-capital?
So,
Well, we're going to the non-capital expenditures next. Should we do the whole thing?
Personally, I think we should do the whole thing, because responding to Councilman Kerrigan is saying, and I think the first slide tried to imply that, or the second slide tried to imply that. We sort of have the 4.4 million option, we have the 6.2 million option.
Mm-hmm.
The way we intended to bring this forward is a list of multiple options, and that
Comments and
option, and then
direction.
we understand completely that we would be living within whatever budget we decided to approve, and so I think we need to go through them all before
Okay.
we say yes or no to one or the other.
Any further discussion on that? Would anybody like to add anything to the proposed capital projects or questions on any of them? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move to the non-capital expenditures. Armando?
Okay, thank you. And just to summarize, in terms of the recommended 3 projects, the cost on that is about $4 million. Moving to the non-capital expenditures, we have, I think, several, we have maybe 5 or 6. The first of these are essentially consultant contracts. One would be to contract with for a neighborhood parking study to try to address and identify strategies for mitigating the parking issues that we have in and around the downtown area as a result of being successful with special events. So the cost estimate for that is $35,000. The next item is a proposed economic development strategy that would be for the entire city. The thought here is that maybe the total cost is around $150,000. We would fund it in part from redevelopment area 1 to the tune of $65,000, in part out of redevelopment area 2. I think the number there is $60,000, and then a little bit out of the city general fund. The resulting economic development strategy would be Spark specific and would be intended to develop strategies for the economic development of the city that would be complementary to, in part, what EDON does, but that, again, would be Spark-centric. The third of these projects is the seasonal ice rink, and this number, the $200,000, is the estimated first-year cost to lease the equipment. I think park staff and I have had a number of discussions with Carson City in particular in terms of the operation of their seasonal ice rink. They have been able to get their net cost of operating that ice rink down in Carson City. This is, I think, the 4th year they're going to do it, down to about $120,000. But we're trying to be conservative here. And you know, I mean, I will be the first to tell you that there will be a net cost every year if you want to have the ice rink. Having said that, Carson City, who faces their own financial challenges, really feel that this ice rink that they're doing has brought a lot of traffic and activity to their downtown in the winter months, and they feel it's worth the cost. So that's the third of those projects. Fourth would be to allocate from the redevelopment agency to the city for purposes of branding, marketing, and special event support, $250,000 in this calendar year to ideally be able to attract additional events, to identify particular improvements or equipment, et cetera, that could be used to better stage those events and reduce the cost of staging those events. So that's the $250,000 that's proposed there. Finally, the fifth of these is $100,000 for preliminary design and engineering to complete the path, if you will, the pedestrian and bicycle path from downtown over to the marina. As you know, RTC, for the most part, funded the construction of this complete street treatment that we did along Victorian Avenue from Pyramid over to Nichols. The idea would be to continue the path over to Nichols and all the way over to the marina to complete that project. And this, we believe that by funding the preliminary engineering and design, that we would be able to advance that process substantially and ideally leverage RTC funds. So the total for these 5 proposed or recommended projects is $650,000 in the current fiscal year. The difference between what you see there is for the most part the part of the economic development strategy that we're proposing to be paid for from Area 2 and the City General Fund. Moving to the third category.
Let's stop there and see if there's any questions or comments on that, on the non-capital. Okay.
Moving to the third of these categories for Area 1, it's we're calling development incentives. The thought here would be to allocate $250,000 in the current fiscal year to incentivize a housing development in downtown Sparks. You may recall that we reported out of the workshop that we conducted a year ago that this was one of the recommendations. Certainly we've had some discussions with ArtSpace in the past about doing an artist lofts project potentially that had an affordable component, but also a commercial aspect to it, and that would have benefits above and beyond simply providing housing for artists. I mean, I think the idea would be that you would have activity, ground floor space that was of a commercial or nature, and secondly, that as a result you would increase that population downtown, and also have spillover effects in terms of arts and culture activities. And so that is the last of these recommended projects.
Okay, Julia?
Well, again, I'd like to speak up in support of this concept. Again, for me, the opportunity to spring load and really jumpstart an arts and culture program in the city of Sparks is part of our overall branding concept. It's part of our overall special events strategy. I think it's, there's sort of three things that are coming together at the same time. Creating a space within the plaza that is more conducive to presenting arts and culture events. And I completely agree that moving the brick structure, the house, out of the middle of that plaza so that you can have a stage at one end and a crowd coming down. I mean, we don't have our own Wingfield Park. We need a space where you can do arts and culture events if we're going to have arts and culture in the city of Sparks. So creating the venue while simultaneously, and it will take time obviously to bring this to fruition, but while simultaneously bringing the artists down into the space so we could start to do things like the street fairs and exhibits and strolling artisans and all the things that were envisioned in the brand leadership team, or the branding project, plus the work that the brand leadership team has been doing to advance this concept. The three of those things together create some energy around jumpstarting an arts and culture program. Add on top of that what the museum has been doing at the other end with the trains, and I think we could start to have an arts and culture program in the city of Sparks that we could hang our hat on and say there's history, there's arts, come on downtown.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I had a question on this item, and now I'm confused. Is this a housing component or an arts and culture component?
Well, potentially it's both. I mean, I think we're not being quite so specific yet, and I think we're really looking for, is there interest on the part of the agency board as a whole in terms of incentivizing a housing development as part of the Victorian Square project? And so the idea here would be to, I think potentially look at packaging, agency land with some cash incentive in terms of advancing the pre-development process so that we can get, bring aboard and ultimately lead to a development agreement here. So if in fact it was something with, for example, art space, then, you have some, I guess what you would call ancillary benefits associated with that. Strictly speaking, if that's not possible, then we would be looking to bring, a housing development of some other sort and incentivizing it to move forward. The opportunity I think that exists with something that has an affordable housing component is that because of the other resources that it's able to tap, like the low-income housing tax credit, it's a project, it's a type of housing development that would be able to move forward even in the current market environment when other types of housing are very difficult to finance. So that was the idea here, Mr. Kelly.
I'm glad I asked the question because I've gone from a proposed development incentive for mixed-use housing to an arts and culture to, no, it's not only $250,000, but it's also a dedication of land program. So I'm glad I asked those questions so I get it all out on the table so I know exactly what this is for. With that said, I'll go back to what my original concern about this is that before this board, one penny goes to the housing market, better take a really good look at the financial situation of the housing market in this community, and is if there anyone out there willing to loan in the housing market. Because I can tell you right now that there's no one out there of any bank or finance company or anything that's willing to go ahead and invest any money at all in new housing projects. I've spent 6 months out there, and I can tell you what, you pick up the phone and call U.S. Bank right now, they'll tell you new construction in Northern Nevada, goodbye. They're not even on their radar screen. So investment firms are looking at this area as being, when you say housing, the first thing they're going to do is hang up the phone because they're not interested. The risk reward here is so great. So this is the least of my priorities of investing in this until the market gets turned around where you can actually see something happen here instead of going on out and building a bunch of units and then, you're not going to get the rents for them.
Well, and again,
Concerning this housing component, the only thing on the horizon right now is art space. That's the only thing that's out there that would be able to get funding. So that's why Julia has been mentioning art space.
And let me just, to be clear, low-income housing projects have been consistently coming on the market throughout the housing downturn, and it's because that they have a financing stream that is very different than the traditional housing financing stream. They have access to federal low-income tax credits. They have access to a variety of funding streams that aren't available to the average home builder. The reason why I'm focused on art space and the reason why we're not being specific about art space is we haven't gotten to the point of talking to boards of directors and other pieces of it. But the reason that I'm particularly interested in that, and this came up from the workshop a year ago, was low-income housing for artists. At the one facility that exists for that in town, the Riverside Artist Lofts, there's a waiting list of 60 families. And so it's the only housing that I'm aware of that has an alternative funding stream and a waiting list in our community. That's why I think it's of interest. But there's obviously a lot of more due diligence to be done before we would be moving forward on a project, but that's why it's coming up in the concept today.
Armando?
And, I think to your question, Councilmember Schmidt, I think basically Northern Nevada gets one low-income housing tax credit project a year. And, the thought is that if this is something that the agency board wants to do, and we throw our weight behind this, that within about, 2 to 5 year period, we could say, and we wouldn't bring you the deal if we didn't think, at the end of the day, if we wouldn't bring you an agreement with someone if we didn't think you would get a project within that time frame. So the thought is, if we want to add a housing component, this is a vehicle to pursue this. It's dependent on the agency ultimately wanting to do that. And again, we have to go through that pre-development process with the prospective developer. We'd want to negotiate a pre-development agreement with a party. The other option would be, of course, to try to work with a local developer. It would be more of a vanilla affordable housing project, and you wouldn't necessarily have some of the potential benefits it have with something that has a commercial component, et cetera. But it's that's the agency board's decision. And again, if what we see here is an opportunity to do this, if the agency board so chooses.
I think you're looking at a public outcry out there if you use public dollars to continue to dilute the housing market.
Well, there's going to be, I can say with relative certainty that, again, there's going to be one in Northern Nevada a year, and the question is, do you want to do something here or not?
Okay.
So I know we're running out of time. So this is a table that sort of summarizes what the recommended expenditures are. About $4 million for capital projects, $650,000 for non-capital expenditures, $250,000 for that development incentive, a total of 4.91. As you recall, if you combine the cash on hand from the agency and the room tax, plus either the room tax credit facility or the unspent bond proceeds, you get to about $4.4 million. So it's about a $500,000 difference. I would say that you're in the ballpark in terms of being able to fund those. As we refine costs, we would be able to give you a better idea as to just exactly what combination of those things you'd want to undertake. If you're willing, obviously, and then there's in fact the ability to not only use those resources but also do the room tax credit facility, you would have enough funds to do all of these projects if you so desired. We've shared with you the recommendations from the agency chair and the vice chair. Very quickly, would like to go through some alternatives that were also discussed. On this sheet, you see approximately $690,000 for the second phase of the C and 10th Street parking garage repairs. If in fact the agency wanted to fund the completion of the link from Victorian Square to Marina, that'd be another $1 million. And then there's something we haven't talked about in some time, and that would be the renovation or potentially the demolition, although at a lower cost, of the 920 Victorian Avenue property that the agency acquired from Pacific Pond, which is over on the east end toward Victorian Avenue. The renovation thought was that we would basically bring the building up to code and prepared for tenant improvements, and then make it available to, for example, someone who wanted to rent bicycles and Segways or something to use on the trail. So those are the alternates. The total cost on those is about $1.86 million. And the idea in part was that if in fact the rest of the agency board liked some of these projects and wanted to suggest, they would look at some of these in addition to or instead of what's proposed, what we discussed up to date.
Okay, so we get to the agency board discussion and direction to staff regarding redevelopment agency number 1. How about that discussion? Mike?
Thank you. Before I put my 2 cents worth in, I just wanted to say that on Saturday, Navy whipped Notre Dame pretty well. At noon, Michon Esquaga agreed with me, so this is the start of a pretty amazing week so far. So with that being said, I think if everybody will go to page 8, this is just kind of my idea of this thing. If you go to the totals and take away the 2.8 for the pavilion, you'll come down to a total of 4.3. I think that we have that in cash, correct? Jeff, correct? We have 4.4, right? Yeah. So that's where I'd like to see us do it. In other words, we could do, I'm talking about the total line. If you look at the total line, and that includes, if you go back to the page that has the...
the funding sources?
Yeah, well, don't worry about the funding sources. We know it's 4.4. I'm trying to work with cash in hand, so that's where I'm going to say that. But if you go back to page 5 where you say that proposed capital project for this parking garage is 1.2 million, that's included in what I'm talking about. If you go there for neighborhood CIP, that's 2 million for the neighborhoods around Victorian Square, Julia. Okay? That's your ward, right? Okay, I just throw that out. Okay, I just throw that out. I know, but I thought I'd throw that out because one of the things that I've been saying on the city council for 11 years is that when you have a redevelopment agency, the object is to take the money from the property tax that you generate and fix up the older parts of Sparks. This will do that. I'd like to see the non-capital expenditures being changed to this. Take away branding and marketing because I think we have a fund for that. Okay, but we do have somewhere else for that. And make it special event support because I think we're gonna get some bad press if it looks like we're using city money to do branding and marketing, so just leave that as special events. I don't think anybody's gonna have a problem with spending $250,000 to promote our special events from that money. And then I think on the one that Ron had a problem with the housing development incentive, just leave it as proposed development incentive of $350,000 because I think one of the things we need to do is have some sort of incentives to get people over here. Now, I don't care if it's housing or it could be a lot of things, but I think we ought to leave it open-ended. And that would be my more than 2 cents. I guess that was a nickel's worth. Thanks.
Okay, and good points, good comments. I would like to proceed, especially with call it the pavilion, until we see the cost, because Nate's going to come through with different options, and we're not looking exclusively at totally covering that square, just partially would be one of the options. So that cost could come way down. So that's my opinion. Julia?
Well, I guess I'd like to ask Mr. Kerrigan for some clarity, because in Nate's presentation, there's sort of multiple things that are going on there. Part of it's making the space more usable short of the structure, so there's moving the brick building and there's getting the trees spread out a little bit more so that we can use that space in different ways. And so I guess what we were looking for today is obviously your initial response to the concepts. But what I would hope that we would come out of here today is please move more forward answering some questions if the cost of the pavilion is one, but also let's get it down to what's the cost of moving that brick building, because I do think that brick building is an impediment to doing several different kinds of special events in our community, and that alone would improve that as a arts and culture venue.
Yeah, and if you look at it, the total is 4.3 million. There's 100,000 left over, and I don't think it's going to cost more than 100,000 to move the building. If you want, I'll just get my truck and we'll take care of it in 2 seconds.
Yeah, until you hit the transformer that's here, or whatever it is. But the 2.8.
Oh, that's right. There's a big one in the middle. Well, maybe
that's the cost.
I have to get something a little bigger.
Now the attorney's involved.
But the 2.8 included fixing the base of the plaza, not just the
Yeah, but I
structure.
think, once again, I think there's a couple of reasons I don't like that pavilion. One of them is flexibility. Mm-hmm. And I think that's my biggest problem with it.
Well,
but
moving that improves the flexibility.
We have 100,000 left over if you did everything that you guys put on the list, except for the pavilion. Have 100,000 left over. I don't know if it cost 100,000 to move that. I don't know. Neil?
Well, and the other piece, just go ahead, and then I'll.
I mean, here's the engineer, so he's gonna tell us he can't do it, but I said you can't move a mountain one time to an engineer, and they did it, so.
No, they always say you can do anything with enough money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
engineers, we can do anything. It's
With
just a
enough
matter of
money.
whether you want to pay
Right.
for it. For the record, Neil Crouch, Community Development Director. There is a significant amount of infrastructure that runs into that little clock building, making it quite expensive to relocate. We are estimating that it's upwards of $500,000 to relocate that facility. So I apologize for giving you bad news, but that's.
No,
that's
you know,
what
in
we're
this day
thinking.
and age, I thought, it'd be a little cheaper, but, okay.
Mr. Mayor?
I would like to see the options of what Nate's talking about for the pavilion and that stuff. I don't know that we need a permanent structure either, but at least we need to see the options to know, and I think to make that a usable space, we need to move that outhouse-looking thing that's there. It's brick.
We do.
Never-
and that'll
never
be-
mind.
I think in any option that he comes forward, that's got to be moved. Okay, so any other, Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just ask Jeff, too, with finance, to throw out another option on out there to look at. I know we're using this room tax for the 1.8 bond, and I'm in favor of tying up the income stream for that based upon, we don't want to lose that income stream. Is there any way that income stream can be tied up into the existing bonds we have right now? Where we're tying up C-tax instead of downtown revenues?
For the record, Jeff Kronk, not really, because it's dedicated to that area. Since those room tax funds are dedicated to that specific area, there's not much we can do other than bonding to protect that.
And that's what I'm
resource,
saying,
unless he just-
is that under the existing bond structure, or even if we have to go back in and refinance some bonds, as you were talking about, can we release C-tax and substitute that for, because that bond was for downtown, so that money is being spent on downtown, tying up that revenue stream to pay for the bonds that we already have.
Right. Actually, the refundings won't do anything as far as to be able to reserve the room tax funds. The only thing, when we refund those other vehicles, they still are going to be restricted under their current bond documents. The additional room tax funds won't do anything in addition to what's already in the current documents themselves, if I'm following what you're.
If I remember what you told me, that you cannot put this 1.8 million in effect unless you go back and do some release of debt structure we have already with the city of Sparks. We have
Right.
to do something to go ahead. So the 1.8 is out of the question unless we go in and where we work with our existing debt structure.
Correct. Only
Okay.
because it's we haven't found a whole lot of interest in the investment community to do that, and this is the only way we've been able to get a deal done, at least in this current market.
Now, can we go in and look at that existing debt structure? We may not be able to borrow, $1.8 million, but have the income stream encumbered by those bonds that we have right now?
No.
No way. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further direction or discussion? Do you have everything you need, Armando?
I think so. I think we'll reconvene and move.
Okay. All right. RDA number 2.
RDA number 2. And we have about 25 minutes left scheduled, and I will say that this is less specific in many respects, in part because there's less money available, in part because, I'll get into it in a second. In terms of goals for the RDA 2 draft action plan, one is to very much to look at the Audie Boulevard corridor and to consider moving forward with our redevelopment effort there. As you know, big picture-wise, the thought has always been that the tax increment revenues from the marina would serve as the resource that would be utilized not only there, but in the Audie and Conductor Heights areas. Certainly with some cash in hand, and I will make note that the reason we have cash in hand is because we terminated the reimbursement agreement with David Dahl. With some cash in hand, there is an opportunity, if you so choose, to direct staff to move forward with looking at a more specific redevelopment plan for the Audie Boulevard corridor. Secondly, we have previously, and it's here fairly recently, that Summit Engineering completed a infrastructure assessment for the Audi Boulevard corridor and have identified a number of infrastructure upgrades and improvements that would be needed if we are ultimately to have more intensity and density of use along that corridor to accommodate that need for additional capacity and more fundamentally to just upgrade the infrastructure in the corridor. Secondly, I will say that RTC has made quite a bit of investment in the Conductor Heights area in terms of the streets and the infrastructure there. As a result, I think we have had a number of inquiries from property owners, brokers, potential businesses looking to go into that area. And so I think are looking here at the possibility of identifying some opportunity sites and seeing if we can't get some of those prospective businesses to actually take the leap and move forward and go forward there. Working with property owners to determine if targeted incentives or infrastructure improvements can leverage private investment in both those areas. Leveraging other resources, I think, in the Audi Boulevard corridor in particular. There's an outstanding question, and this is not one of the recommendations, but I think we felt we had to pose a question as to whether we want to pursue acquisition of the Marina Village property or some other strategy to stabilize and ultimately complete that development of that site. And finally, and this is, I think, very significant, a goal here would be to reserve funds for future debt service requirements. And with that, we'll look at the resources, and Jeff will explain why we feel that's so important.
Explain a one-line item here. Yeah.
Well, that's the
area number 2 is actually fairly a little bit more straightforward, albeit maybe a little bit tougher nut to crack as far as projecting what's going on out there. So currently what we have, and again, this is in accordance to what we had filed with our fiscal 11 budget. We're watching it as the year progresses, but it's still real early in the year. We have about $1.8 million that we're projecting to be an unreserved fund balance. But probably the real story, if you will, is what makes that up and what we're expecting for fiscal 11 and going forward. Insofar as the revenues covering the annual debt service, and you'll see on that second page there that we have up as a net shortfall, if you will, of about $300,000 of revenue covering that debt service right now. Could that change? Absolutely. The area number 2 is probably the one area that has potential for growth, and at least from the last assessment period, it held its own better than just about anywhere in the city, to be honest with you. So we don't know how long that's going to be the picture. That could change dramatically, actually fairly quickly. But what we know right now, that's what we're expecting. So. No, actually.
I want to go back to the.
Oh, I thought I saw. No, I saw a hand.
Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff, and I just want to go ahead and cover that because this is my concern with redevelopment agency number 2. You said that debt could change very, very quickly, but I think you were optimistic that that $300,000 negative would go away.
Well, it could go either way, actually.
Okay, well, that's my concern that
Yeah.
I want to cover and talk about is that this round of property tax reduction, we think we're going to see this next year, is going to be mainly focused on commercial properties, which that district is high commercial property value or percentage of the total property tax makeup of that. When will the tax assessor gives us some picture of what he's looking at in the next tax bill for commercial properties, especially this area?
Actually, pretty soon. I'm hoping to hear something within a couple of weeks. I've been contacting the assessors and talking to them on a more informal basis. They haven't sent out the initial valuations that everybody gets, those little cards everybody gets in the mail. They haven't sent those out, obviously. Those will come out later, but I'm going to, obviously trying to get some information as soon as we can. They're in the process, based on what I know right now, of a conversation I had with them last week. They're in the process of capturing all their data, and they still have some work to do with some of the larger commercial properties, casinos in the area. But from my understanding, they've captured most of that data, and they're in the process of putting it into their system. So it's a matter of weeks where we'll be able to get some data out of their system.
Because my concern, you know, in the 2010, 2011 budget cycle, all the appeals from that area were overturned by the Board of Taxation.
Or withdrawn.
Or withdrawn, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we held up very well in that district because they were not successful. You know, with the present climate, they could be very successful this year, and that number would go from 300,000 to potentially in the millions. And I think that's one reason why this district, we have to be very, very conservative on, at least until we have some final numbers from the county commissioners or from the county tax assessors on this item. Thank you.
So again, as with RDA 1, we will present the agency chairs and vice chairs' recommendations as well as alternates, and we also have the categories of capital, non-capital, and development incentives. In terms of the proposed capital projects, the first of these is the Audi Boulevard corridor infrastructure improvements that I referenced that would be based in large part on the infrastructure assessment that Summit Engineering did. We would be looking at improvements and potential capacity enhancements to the sanitary and storm sewers, potable water systems, and other utilities. You know, the moving above ground to the pedestrian and bike mobility, and in general, the potential reconstruction of that street, with which obviously we would be looking to leverage RTC's resources, would be another aspect of that. So our dollars hopefully would leverage those other dollars. And then one of the key things that's to some extent impaired investment along that corridor is that some of those properties do not have good access. With the transfer of the road from NDOT to local control, there's the opportunity to improve access to some of those properties and ideally see more business development there.
Quick question about Audi, if I could, Mr. Chairman. When we took those properties over, didn't we get some money from the state to do whatever is, can we get, maybe find out what's, I don't know if this is the right venue to talk about it, but we get a report on what we got and what we can use it for?
And again, I've already touched on this, but you know, one of the things ideally that we'd like to see occur along Audi is some sort of complete street treatment where you would really improve not only vehicular access but also pedestrian and bicycle access along the corridor. It's an area that's surrounded by a lot of, it's really probably the densest area of town, and there's a lot of multifamily development, and there's a lot of folks on foot and potentially on a bicycle in that area. So we feel this would be
I think if we leverage our dollars, this can be another Victorian street.
Yeah, right.
Very nice.
The non-capital expenditures are, again, a share of the economic development strategy. Looking at the contracting for an Audi Boulevard development plan that would focus on the opportunity sites. I don't know if you wanted me to go into this now, but there's been some work in the past, and there are multiple sites there that have a lot of potential, fairly large sites. The old Shopko Shopping Center site is over 17 acres. This property here to the east is 5 acres. And there's about 8 acres here, and there's a lot of underutilized property in that area. And the goal there would be to work with the property owners to develop strategies for the development of those properties over time. And then the big number here on this list of non-capital expenditures would be $800,000 for additional reserves for future debt service. At the current rate, that would be not quite 3 years. As Mr. Schmidt has noted, that number, that deficit could change. So, in fact, it could be something less than that. The idea would be to set aside cash to get us through the next couple of years. But again, there is some uncertainty there. I don't know if you have any questions about these proposed non-capital expenditures. In terms of proposed development incentives, the idea would be to potentially, again, try to get some of these property owners who have, particularly in the Conductor Heights area, who have indicated some interest in acquiring buildings and property down there and actually moving their businesses there over that hump. But, you know, if we, obviously, if we didn't identify those opportunities, then these dollars would have to be reallocated, maybe to debt service. So, to summarize, capital projects, $650,000, non-capital expenditures, $950,000, including the additional debt reserves. Development incentives, $190,000, 179, and that compares with about the $1.8 million that is identified as available. The alternate capital projects would be if the agency wanted to pursue acquisition of the Marina Villas property, which is listed at just a little short of that and probably could be obtained for something less than that. I did speak to the broker. It is still on the market. If there was that interest, or again, the alternate idea would be to set some dollars aside if in fact someone does acquire it and you want to help, you know, they're looking for assistance in order to make a project feasible, you'd have those dollars. And then $350,000 for Conductor Heights infrastructure improvements. So that's $1,035,000. And we're at this slide. And
Go ahead. Armando, what does that, go back to that slide for the marina, the Marina Village. What are villas? What, is that just a condo site?
it's the condo site. It's actually a deceptively larger than you think. It's about 3.8 acres. It includes the parking garage. It does not include the commercial building.
Right, right.
So there's actually, the parking garage, you know, would have been wrapped with condos.
Right.
And then there's another part of the project that's over on the other side of the canal. Would have been a second phase of the project. So that's.
Oh, okay, I
3.8
remember
acres.
that. Okay, and it's on the mark for what, 990 or
Well,
something?
it's listed at 980.
At 980,
$980,000.
Thanks.
Probably pick it up for a minute dance.
Even 980 is cheap, but, okay. Let's move to discussion. Any discussion or direction that you'd like to see? Mike?
Thanks, Ron. You know, the only caution is the same thing that Ron brought up, and that is, I'd really like to, I mean, I don't have a problem with any of the projects in this area, but I'd really like to kind of hang on till we see what the tax assessor's going to do, because I'd hate to see that go from $300,000 a year to $600,000 and have us spend most of it. So I don't want to go upside down on that. And as far as the Marina Villas, yeah, I kind of want to go throw a $300,000 bid at it or something. I mean, you know, if we could pick it up. I mean, we picked up the property, that 10 acres, pretty cheap. So maybe
It's out there.
It's a fire sale. So.
And 980 is cheap, but I mean.
Well, I think it was on
Yeah,
the
if you
market
make
for like,
him an offer.
I think he owed 19 million on it or something. They're, you know, 980. Throw 350,000 at him and see
Yeah.
if we can pick it up.
You can pursue that, couldn't you? You could,
We can look into it. I mean, I did speak to the broker last week. I got an indication that there was some willingness on the part of the bank to entertain a lower offer. I don't know if he'd entertain 350 or how much lower is well phrased. So, you know, we will continue to look at this. I would suggest that between now and when we bring these action plans back for formal action, ideally Jeff will know more in terms of the assessments and the values, and then you can have more information for your decisions.
Okay, anything else? Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, you know, dealing in real estate, I think there's always an opportunity there to take a look at the marina and see what's going on. I think, you know, staff could take a quick look at it and see what the alternative uses could be for the project. You know, can we turn it into just a parking garage for a while, you know, until we sit on it? Definitely purchasing it and getting it cleaned up, you know, would be a great improvement to the area. And, you know, I see nothing wrong with throwing out a low number. You know, cash is king right now. If your banks want to get it off their books, they'll do it. So, but the second, you know, I think having RTC looking at Audi Boulevard and what we need to substitute over there, that's priority number 2 for me. You know, actually number 3. Number 1 is looking at the debt structure and make sure we're okay, you know, for at least 12 to 24 months in advance, and then looking at those 2 items. I think those are good values to our dollars.
Okay, any further discussion? I agree with everything that's been said here today, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A motion? And a second?
Second.
We are adjourned.
I told